Hello. Today, doing something a little bit different and looking at a single item of kit, the officer's universal pattern greatcoat. It obviously functions primarily as a coat for cold or wet weather, but it also has a number of other uses, which could tell us a surprising amount about what life was like for officers living in the field in the early part of the First World War. Let's have a look at it in detail then.
Looking first at the front of the coat, it's double-breasted with two rows of gilt regimental buttons, in this case of the Black Watch. It has a deep stand and fall collar which can be fastened with hooks and a tab underneath in bad weather. The cuffs are turned back 6 inches, much like the other rank's greatcoat, and the diagonal slanting pockets are lined with velvet. At the rear of the coat, there is an adjustable belt, a deep expanding pleat which allows for movement when the coat is worn, and a long slit in the skirt for riding. In the left side under the arm, there's a slit to allow the hilt of the sword to be worn outside the coat, with the scabbard and frog underneath.
When the universal pattern officer's greatcoat was introduced in 1902, it bore some resemblance to the other rank's service dress of that time, in that it had these piped shoulder boards that you can see on the one hanging behind me. Initially, these were detachable, almost exactly the same as the ones on the other rank service dress, attaching with a loop at the bottom and buttoning at the top. And these were in a variety of different colours to denote branch of service. So here, both of these are scarlet piped infantry versions. This one's a little bit faded, being an original from 1902. In 1911, on the greatcoat, these were changed to being sewn to the shoulder, as the original example you see here is, and still buttoning at the top, so it can be used to hold equipment on if it's worn over the greatcoat. The other rank's version of the coloured detachable shoulder board had long since gone out of service at this point, but the coloured shoulder boards on the greatcoat remained. There are examples dating from the Second World War, although they largely fell out of favour during the Great War. Not really because it's a problem with camouflage, but more because the system for identifying officers by the colour of the greatcoat straps was rather unnecessarily complicated and led to a lot of confusion. We can see on this chart here that a vet and a doctor are barely distinguishable. It's just by a little bit of cherry or maroon coloured braid. We can also see some examples of original detachable shoulder boards from kindly supplied by Toby Brayley from his own collection and the Military Police Regimental Museum. So here from Toby's collection we see the Royal Army Medical Corps again, with white piping and dull cherry braid. The Army Pay Department, again with white piping and yellow braid. And the Corps of Military Police itself with white piping and black braid. These coloured shoulder boards, as mentioned previously, did fall out of fashion during the First World War, but we do see some still in use quite a long time later. Dave Clark, a fellow officer of Scots at War, has a post-1934 Black Watch officer's greatcoat with these red infantry shoulder boards still in place. So they do survive for quite a long period. Perhaps the most key feature of this item of uniform is what it's actually made of. It's not serge like a lot of the other ranks' uniforms, and it's not barathea or whipcord like some of the officers' service dresses. It's made of what's described in the 1911 dress regulations as drab waterproof mixture, and that's exactly what it is. It's waterproof. It's effectively very tightly milled wool, but if we put some water on the surface of it and move it around, you'll see that it just beads and runs off, and you can leave that there for hours. I've worn this in the rain, I've slept under it, out just under the stars. It is extremely waterproof and completely windproof. On the inside as well, we've got a sort of quite rough silk lining, but beneath that, there's also a rubberized lining, so it's got an extra layer of waterproofing underneath. So this actually, we're going to realise that this is actually an extremely practical garment. It's particularly long. It's supposed to reach within a foot of the ground. This one's slightly short for me, but it's particularly liked by Highland regiments for that reason, because it gives some protection to the knees in winter. It does begin to be replaced quite early in the war, certainly in trousered regiments, by things like the British Warm, which sort of evolved from the pea jacket, which was authorised in 1911 for officers, or waterproof trench coats, effectively long Macintoshes. But this still has its place in being extremely warm, windproof, but also waterproof. When an officer wasn't wearing his greatcoat, it was often carried as part of marching order, usually in a sling rolled up like this. It could be worn on the back or just over one shoulder. Either way, it became a particularly useful method of carrying other kit, because spare clothing, things like that, could be rolled up in it and carried in marching order. There was only one item of kit actually prescribed to be carried in the greatcoat in 1914, which was the cap comforter, which went in one of the pockets. But given that the greatcoat was on a junior officer's person most of the time, we do have records of them carrying all sorts of things, from spare clothing to washing and cooking kit. This becomes particularly useful in the early stages of the war, particularly during the retreat from Mons, where quite often officers couldn't get to their valises and had to just survive out of what was on their persons. Some of them carried packs like the other ranks, or civilian purchased knapsacks, things like that, but the greatcoat roll still remained a popular way of carrying the coat and various other pieces of kit. And then the added advantage of that is that if the greatcoat's there carrying everything else, it can then be used as a blanket at night as well. Something that I've done, and it's perfectly serviceable. So the greatcoat effectively then takes on three roles as a coat, a rucksack, and a sleeping bag stroke blanket.
So hopefully that explains a little bit about this very practical and multi-purpose garment, and also shows that the life of an officer, particularly a junior one, wasn't always very comfortable.